the co-presence mode. And that's the primary mode, whether that looks like Sunday mornings, worship, Bible studies, hospital visits. It's still something that is co-present. The Eucharist, communion, so forth. Mainly because I think churches are in places. They're geographically in specific places serving particular populations. And I, maybe this is like an ecclesiology kind of issue that I am not trained in and don't have enough under my belt to know how to navigate. But I tend to think that churches are local, and that's what they're meant to be in some way. And so if you're a leader in a church, you're serving that local parish or congregation. You're speaking, you're delivering sermons and homilies to that group, not to the entire global community that's accessible through YouTube, right? Yes, they might be, like, what you preach or what you say might be accessible throughout all, right? If someone's in Italy or in Kenya or wherever, yes, they can access it, but they're going to access it. They're going to enjoy, hopefully, that they're accessing your place in your time, your community. They're witnessing what your community is going through. And so I guess I don't know if I'm getting at your question, but I tend to think that it's important to retain the sense of the local, the co-present. Now, what we do, let's say if we're just going to talk about like Sunday mornings worship, what we do at that Sunday morning, to me, and I think I talk about this in the book, is, to me, it's really up in the air, actually. Because I would argue that maybe we shouldn't be doing what we're doing quite in the same way anymore. Yeah, because it's I guess it really comes out of my conversations with my students. It's like most of them are like, I don't need to go to my local church. I can go onto YouTube and watch this fabulous sermon and worship experience somewhere else. Why do I need to go to the local place? And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. Why do you need to go to the local place? Like, that's a legit question. And so then to me, it's like, well, what does the local place have to offer? Well, gosh, it needs to offer something that's going to draw someone out of their bed on a Sunday morning that thinks it's worthwhile, or whatever time, if you do service at a different time. And so I'm really drawn to the models of eating, church as meals. There's kind of interesting movements that are out there that I want to explore more, but I just think there's something about that communal table of sharing a meal that could be the place to kind of really rethink what we're doing when we get together to worship on, whatever day it might be. But again, this is where I'm kind of the least formed, and where I'm still kind of puzzling through. And I'm just a sociologist. I don't work in the church or ministry, so I might not know what I'm talking about at all. This is just what it looks like from the outside,
Yeah, Scott. I'm just curious, based on everything that you've learned, like, how have you applied this to your personal context? Like, have you done anything as far as like boundaries with your children, or practices for yourself with your devices? Like how is it what you learned informed you, and like setting up maybe rhythms for yourself?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for me, I have a couple morning rhythms that are pretty set now. And I ask my family members to do the same, to not look at their devices for the first 15, if they can afford 30 minutes after they wake up. Just to wake up. And that's my husband and I and my kids, I also, we do have a charging station of our devices that's on the other side of the house from our bedrooms. And so we also kind of have a like, no devices in your bedroom when you go to bed kind of policy. We're a family that values sleep. And so we try to create that space, physical space. If you read the book, you know about monotasking. And I give the example of when you drive, you just drive. You don't listen to anything. You don't listen to podcasts, you don't listen to music, you just drive. And I did that for a pretty long season, actually. I'm kind of coming out of it. But for a long season, that was actually like really nurturing, actually. It was kind of like the only space and time in my life where it was quiet, because I just had so much going on. And so, the commute to my kids' school or something was the only time it was really quiet, and it was really formative for me. So yeah, it's all these kind of small things. My family is not like on board with all of the crazy things that I would love to do. Which is why, I always remind people that I didn't write a parenting book, and there's a reason why. Because, like we're all still very much in the trenches and in mid formation. I don't have any success stories to, trot my kids out and be like, look at what, happened here. It's highly experimental, and I'm always adapting and trying to shift. And I'm not good, I talk about like needing to have good conversations with, people in your household about how you want to do your devices. I'm not good at that either. Like I can play them out in my head, but I'm just a wimp. I'm a coward. And so, we go in fits and spurts. So I think that's probably why I tend to run kind of conservative on the kinds of changes that I suggest, because what I feel like is true, that even small changes like 15 minutes in the morning can actually make a pretty substantial difference in someone's life. And that's what gives me hope, because I don't know that I have the strength to convince my family for anything else, more than that.
Right.
Thanks. Oh yeah, Justin, go ahead.
Dr. Wusong, thank you for your work. You say in your book, you're talking about digital natives. You say they do not naturally know how to handle the power and freedoms that digital life grants them.
Yeah.
They have not instinctually found their own way toward becoming their better selves, as so many assume they would.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then you talk about how parents don't even know how to navigate the waters as well, ourselves. What sociologically, like not even Christian homes, but just homes, middle school and high school homes, what are the assumptions, the false assumptions that you think are in parents' minds that are allowing their students, or their kids rather, just to kind of think that they can figure it out on their own?
Yeah. Well, like, so my son's on Minecraft. I'm not on Minecraft. When he says he's been doing something on Minecraft, I have to ask him, what does that mean? Like, what's actually happening when you say you're doing X, right? And so I think that dynamic, right, is, and a lot of sociologists talk about this, and others that study media, is just that the technology, because our young people are becoming well-versed in particular services or platforms that we aren't, that they're having to teach us, and that flips the typical relationship between a parent and a child, right? The typical one where like, I'll teach you how to play basketball, right? And make a shot. Here's what you got to do, like it flips that, right? So that's the child that's teaching the parent. And you could go older and be like, yeah, maybe we were the child that taught our parent how to use the VCR or whatever, right? There's lots of examples for that. So it's not a false assumption, but it's a dynamic, right, that exists that then makes parents often think like, well, the child knows how to do it, right? Like they're managing it because I don't know what this is, and I don't have the time to figure it out. I think what I find when I hear from parents and the most is like what's the biggest dynamic is two things actually. It's not so much that they're false premises, but it's like everybody else is doing it. Like every other kid has the phone or the Apple Watch. So how can I not let my kid have it too? And then there's my kid's school requires them to have this device. And so they just came home with this tablet. What am I like? Am I supposed to pull them out of the school? Like, what are we talking about here? So it's both social and institutional, right? And that those are the pressures that parents feel. I think what's interesting is, and this will be interesting for you all as you're kind of moving into this work to see what happens. I think we're actually in this really interesting time where like things are starting to shift. Like there's just enough movement, like a lot of parents have watched Social Dilemma, I think, is that what it's called? On Netflix. Just like the understanding, right, that hey, maybe these devices aren't so great, right? And all the stuff on the news about Instagram and the negative effects on teenagers' mental health, right? Like this stuff is starting to trickle, right, into parents' consciousness, at least on the upper middle class level. And so you're starting to see, like in my kids' school, they've gone from just kind of full blanket 1-to-1 ratio tablets, like every kid just gets one, kindergarten through 12, right? To, hey, maybe our kindergartners don't need to bring, like one, maybe they don't need it, or two, maybe they don't need to bring that tablet home, right? And recently they just decided, hey, they have this new policy where students are not allowed to look at their cell phones in class. They're supposed to keep it in their bags, right? This was not the case 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and last year, right? So like what my son is experiencing in junior high now is different from what my daughter has experienced 5 years ago, right? So there's this arc where people and organizations are starting to realize maybe this isn't so great. Actually, our kids aren't doing so great. I'm curious to see how much it could kind of keep turning, right? And what creative adjustments schools can make, and parents then will start making. I think there's definitely class issues. I won't go into now unless you want to talk about it, but I think there is definitely different classed experiences with this.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Question, comment? So this is great. Thanks for your honesty about parenting. It's so good. It's just so, I feel so seen. Thank you. And I had a laugh when you were talking about silence in the car. It's a practice that I was a Lenten practice that I did for a while, but I realized that when I listened in silence in the car, I would just hear everything that was wrong with my car. The radio on. It became more expensive. So that's what that reminded me of. So obviously you take a really positive turn. We've already sort of stepped into this. I mean, this idea of embodiment, and then you really focus in on this idea of Christian practices. Now, I'm wondering if you could just expound on that a little bit more, just how you see that as maybe not an antidote, but certainly maybe a way forward in the ways that we think about our human and spiritual lives, but also as we live in this world that's affecting us.
Yeah. Um, so I think that embodied praxis is both something that sorry, too many thoughts trying to run to the door at the same time.
Yeah, take your time.
Embodied practice, I think, is something that certainly is undervalued in the tech world, because so much of the tech world is about getting out of our bodies, or at least the irrelevance of our bodies, right? Like we don't have to be someplace to be engaged someplace. And there's certainly, people have written about cyber Gnosticism and so forth. But I think curiously, at least in certain parts of the church, particular church traditions, there's also a kind of like devaluing of the efficacy of what we do with our bodies. And so certainly, since you've read the book, that a lot of it is kind of comes out of my own personal experience of joining the Anglican Church and being formed by liturgy in ways that were completely unexpected. And recognizing that it's this really interesting way to actually kind of go around like cognitive ways of transformation, right? It's like you just train your way there, right? The athlete or the musician understands this. You just keep doing it. And so I think the spiritual disciplines, again, like the Christian inheritance that I came in with was kind of more from the holiness piety movements, right? I was not raised up in like the desert fathers and mothers. That's all new to me. And so for a long time, I just thought of the disciplines as, performative, like things I had to do to like show that I'm this spiritual person. And I didn't have an understanding of how the practices that you just did with your body would come to form you, right? That it wasn't in some ways about your intention, right? It's just you keep doing it. And so that's where I think it just reoriented, like when I came to understand that through my experience through Anglican liturgy, I was like, oh, okay, like now I understand these disciplines in a different way, right? Like it's not like a New Year's resolution, right? Like I'm not supposed to do this thing and it's supposed to like make me a better person because I've invested 6 weeks in this spiritual discipline. It's like, no, it's just you do it because you just trust that it's going to form you eventually one day, who knows? But it's, there's this intrinsic good. And so I think this is all to kind of where I'm going to is that I think there are certain aspects of God and the Christian faith that in every historical moment we have a harder time accessing. And so I write about this in terms of like the hiddenness of God or adoration, right? These are the silence of God, right? Like these are characteristics and natures of the divine that are very difficult for us in a productivity oriented society to access, right? Like, what does it mean to sit for 15 minutes and not do anything, right? Like that's, it's very foreign. And what I think is so interesting is that the American Western forms of Buddhism have made incredible strides in like intervening on American culture with mindfulness and meditation and yoga, right? We all think of this as like Buddhist, but it's like there are actually all these like parallel Christian traditions that are quite the same with different theology, different framework. but has similar types of kind of questions about, or critique, I should say, critique about the ways our culture and our society kind of drive us to idolize productivity, efficiency, and so forth. And so to me, the disciplines, especially like, I've become increasingly interested in the contemplative tradition because of my studies of technology. It's just like, this seems like the tradition that we need in our times, right? That these desert fathers and mothers, like they understood something about God and God's nature that most of us have very little access to, because we don't know how to be quiet. We don't know how to still ourselves. We don't know the value of being unproductive. It's very challenging for us. But that's exactly what we need to grow in if we're going to be grounded, because we're kind of driving ourselves crazy, chasing all the time.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, this gets back to what you said earlier, just about the system, right? I mean, we just feel this continual pressure to produce and keep
Mhm.
up. I think it comes through in our educational institutions as we try to cram more and more into less and less time. And I think, we feel that, I think, in youth ministry, where I think the pressure is on to save kids before they go to college or whatever's after high school, right? Like, so we're asked to somehow incorporate these disciplines in a certain time frame, and we expect results, right? So, I find that really really challenging. Some of the work that we've been doing at FYI with regards to practices, which you made me think of, which I really appreciate, is I also think there's something about practice, at least with some of the Christian practices, that are portable, right? Like they're almost like a device. Like you can take them with you. Like if you learn how to pray, you don't need youth group to keep praying. If you learn contemplation or stillness, like you can take that with you where you go. And so I think in a world that feels more decentered in a lot of the things, including our spirituality, there's hope for me that the Christian practices can speak to our in motion lives, especially that young people feel, in some really, really powerful ways. I think what can be missing is the embodiment piece, or maybe the communal embodiment. So I don't know if we've completely solved it, but I think I really resonated with your emphasis on practices, just because I think, I don't know, some of our work is just, I think discovering that as well. So I think I really appreciated that.
Yeah, I think, no, that's good. I think that maybe some of it is, and this is the part that gets me excited in my class, is I love it when students try something new. And they're just surprised by it. They're like, oh, that actually was super helpful. I would never have thought that sitting for 10 minutes quietly was actually going to refresh me. And that, like you said, and then that's portable. I can do that. That's actually doable. And I don't need to become some like superwoman spiritual guru to do this. And so I think a lot of the work is equipping, right? Rather than like achieving transformation, right? It's sort of like, here's the tool, let's practice this together. Let's give it a try for this season. I guess you probably sense it in the book. It's like, I think of us, and this is a Jamie Smith thing, I think of us as creatures with appetites. And when we taste something good, right, like we're gonna want more. And I think our young people, like they catch that first flush of like excitement and stimulation on social media, and it's very gratifying in lots of ways for many young people. But then they know the backside too. They know the shadow side. And so for us to be able to actually name it and say like, yeah, I know it's both wonderful and terrible at the same time. And we can actually be a space that can try to help you lessen the terrible, right? And it's not just through technique per se, like these instrumental techniques that you can do, but it's like expanding their imagination about like, this is who you are as a human being. This is who God
right.
is, you know? And this is
Right.
why you long for belonging, because this is about your relationship with God, you know, in the end, that's
Yeah.
actually what it is. And so trying to expand their imaginations is often what I find myself trying to do with my students, because I think there's just kind of a, at least with students or young people that grow up in Christian homes, there can be a kind of rote nature to their faith, or what they think Christianity is. And
Yeah.
so providing these other sorts of expansive imagination breaking sorts of examples can be really helpful for them.
Yeah. I love the way you hold this commitment to imagination, but also the accessibility of what you're talking about. Like 10 minutes of silence, right? That is like an act of faith, right? But that can be celebrated. So we want to get here, but this little bit here is really awesome, right? I mean, I think that's a beautiful picture of discipleship and teaching and mentoring and maybe what we really hope for. I love the way you hold that. It's just is quite inspiring. Yeah. Any thoughts, comments, reactions? Yeah,
I do.
Yeah, Josh.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of reports on the use of social media among teens. Most say it's pretty steady and most teens are on it. But I've seen a couple in the last year that says they're leaving in droves. It's just a couple that I've seen. Do you see any time in the future where teens will kind of wholesale reject social media?
I think of people as moving from platform to platform, right? And so there's going to be whatever the next big thing is. So they might leave Instagram or Snapchat, but that's because they've gone to someplace else. It's, you know, if we project all the way out, maybe beyond the length of your careers, but maybe not, you know, all that stuff about metaverse and all the stuff about the Internet of Things, you know, all the sort of biometrics. I just think what we're dealing with now is just really going to be peanuts compared to what's coming. It just,
I agree.
it feels like small change, which is why I think it's really not about addressing the specifics of social media even, right? It's really about how do we help ourselves and others around us, like get a hold on what it means to be human beings, because it's just going to keep changing. It's going to get more challenging. It's going to get more immersive. And yeah, it's just going to be super different. And again, you know, I mentioned the classed experience. I do think the turn, like the critical turn, like people are having some skepticism about technology. That's going to keep happening, I think, in the upper and upper middle class, because those classes have access to certain kinds of studies and conversations that lower working class poor don't have access. Because I think in a lot of those communities, there's still a championing of the technology in a sort of uncritical way. It's sort of like you need to be on this to be a worker, you know, a productive citizen in the 21st century, that kind of stuff. But I think you're also going to see, I can't remember if I feel like I talk about this maybe just a little bit, but you're going to see this sort of divide where the more, you know, high you go up on the economic stratification, the more you can buy your way out of digital interactions, right? And the lower you go, the more relegated you are to telehealth, to education that is online, right? Like, because that's the cost-effective way, right? And you're stuck with that. So like the higher up you go, you can buy yourself into more human interactions. right? Get a real doctor that will come and visit you, which is why I think the church becomes so important, right? Because it's
Yeah.
an institution that says, hey, no, like we're actually not gonna go in that direction. We want to be with you. We want to journey with you as you go through life. And it hopefully, crosses these sorts of economic, um, you know, differentiations.
Any other thoughts? So you mentioned in the book, but I'd just love to hear it straight from you. Talk to us a little bit more about the Freedom Project. Like we know a little bit about it, but any updates or new thoughts or discoveries?
Yeah, I think so I'm teaching it this spring. I'm teaching Internet and Society this spring, and I'm actually thinking of doing a major revamp, just to try some new things out. Because what I'm interested in is, what seems to always be the most transformative is these small adjustments that students make. And they're amazed. And they're also struck by like the things that are hardest to give up, like music in the car or when they're running. But I'm actually curious about, I have this one stage in there where trying to get people to think about, like one of the most powerful exercises for students is always to think about, when I grow old and I look back, what do I hope to see? Right. What do I want to have done? And I have them list out, 10 non-digital activities that they want to do, go to the museum, go see my cousin who I haven't seen for 2 years, learn to bake bread, whatever it is. And then I ask them to go do it. Right. I want to lean into that part, the go do it part, like harder. Because I'm interested in actually, I'm curious about like what happens to us when we actually start cultivating these other practices that are using our bodies to make or to do things, like not just a one-off, but like we commit to it actually. Like, so I go garden once a week, or I go play my instrument once a week. Like, is there something that people experience, right, when it is more regular or patterned at least? And that kind of comes out of my growing interest in the role that making, like whether that's woodwork or craft or knitting, baking. I'm kind of interested in where that like area that of life that has been so like it used to be just a necessity, right, in people's lives. Now it is a leisure activity for most of us, right? But like I'm curious about like what that necessity and the activity of making, what that actually gave, like how that actually fed people, even when it was out of, dreary, mundane necessity. Did it actually feed people in ways that we underestimate? And so, yeah, that's just a long way to say that I'm interested in getting students to actually try, like, to lean into these different activities a little deeper, just to see what happens. So I kind of need to get through a lot of the Freedom Project faster, earlier in the semester, so I can give them time, or I need to find some way to sequence it to get them going earlier, so we have that like a little bit of that longitude.
So hard, so hard.
Yeah.
Okay, I got 2 more questions, and I want to respect your time. So obviously you wrote this book to answer some questions, and we know good research answers some questions and raises a bunch more. So what's the next book? What are you sort of thinking about in line of this, or maybe something tangential?
Yeah. So some of it might go into this making direction that I'm curious about.
Yeah.
It would be fun to like talk to people who actually make in their lives, whether it's professionally or it's just a regular part. I'm also kind of interested in a slightly different tack, which is I've started thinking about how technology might act as like a pacifying agent in our lives, right? So like, when do we turn to our technologies? When we're stressed, when we feel lonely, anxious, right? And so it's not just that, like, it's not merely that it's stimulating, entertaining, or that we feel responsible and we need to check our emails, but that there's also an aspect in which we turn to them for comfort in these particular moments, and trying to get at what is it that we're looking for? Why is it that we're going there and not somewhere else? But it is the pacifying function that I feel I don't talk a whole lot about in this book, but I'm just increasingly, I don't know, increasingly burdened by it, I guess. Because it's mainly a burden that comes out of feeling like, yeah, it's the only place for this person to go. They don't see what the other options are, or maybe there are no other options, like really feasible ones for them in their life. And so it's kind of wrapped up in sort of the larger sociological concerns about like, what do we do about the fact that our society has changed? Like bricks and mortar neighborhoods aren't what they used to be. People do not join associations or clubs or churches in the ways that they used to in the United States, at least. There are good things about those changes, and there are really bad things too. And so it's like, how do we live when we have these needs? We need real alternatives for fulfilling these needs. The church is certainly a huge one for me, but it's also, it's part of a landscape of other institutions. So that might be where I want to go.
Yeah, I love it. We'll look forward to seeing where you go with that. Okay, one final thing. You have in front of you 25 scholar practitioners, youth leaders. What would you say to us as some parting words? What would you like to say?
So the first thing is kind of what I tell parents is, if it feels overwhelming, it's not your fault. Nobody else has done this before. Like nobody else has navigated this, like the landscape that you're going to be navigating or that you already do. And so I think it takes a lot of courage and wisdom to know how to do it. I also do think that post-pandemic, or whatever you want to call this stage that we're in, it's actually a remarkable time for, I feel like it's opportunity. Like people are open to change. So many people's lives have been disrupted from what was patterned out before. So I think like this is the time to try new things, right? Try new things that people have not tried before, because it's open still, and it's not always going to be open, right? Like once we move out of this particular period, it's going to close again. That opportunity door is going to close again, and people won't be so interested, right? They're going to get locked into their grooves. And so my encouragement to you, especially as you're filling up with great ideas and with each other, like with each other, to talk out and dream and imagine, like, like really cool new ideas for how to do ministry, how to do church, this is the time. So in a lot of ways, like, I feel for you because it's daunting, but I also am super excited because it just feels like this is an incredible time to be going into what you're doing. Because there's possibility. People are open to change right now.
It's really, really good. Thank you. We receive it. And back to you. Thank you for your scholarship. Thank you for the heart and soul of your work. We feel it in your writing, even more in this dialogue. We're just grateful for you. And I just want you to know you've got a group of people in this room that are deeply appreciative of what you're doing and how it's helping and informing our personal lives, but also our work as well. So, and thank you for investing this time. We're deeply grateful. So thank you. Let's get it.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll
It's a
be in
real pleasure.
touch.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Okay. Appreciate it.